Okay, so we've covered section A of paper 2, which is the directed writing task. Many of the things that I have explained will help you later on when we attempt more papers, more directed writing tasks. The approach to finding the points, rephrasing them, and uh, how evaluation works, adding your own points, the organization. I might you know, tell you a bit more about that later, but generally what we discussed yesterday will continue to apply, right? So it's not a one-time thing. We have covered the basics, the basic requirements of a directed writing task yesterday. What is left is now the requirements of the various different tasks within directed writing. You've just been given a magazine article. We also have letters, which could be both formal and informal, and emails similarly, and a speech, which could go both ways as well, but mostly semi-formal or informal depending on the audience. Uh, a report, which is always formal, and it has right the subtle differences between the formats and the requirements. And on that note, because you have a magazine article, try and keep it uh, semi-formal. And one thing that you can try and include, if I just note it down over here, what you can try and include, so right, your language will be semi-formal. So not entirely casual and not entirely well formal, obviously. You probably don't want to use contractions. An example of contractions is don't. So you went from do not to don't with an apostrophe to show that you shortened the word. So you don't use contractions. You can use figurative language. So figurative language would include idioms, similes, metaphors, stuff like that. You can also include humor. In fact, depending on your audience, since you're writing it for young people, if you can include humor of some sort, that would be a good touch. All right. And so when I do get your submissions and we go through them, we can point out how well we've done and where we can improve, and perhaps then look in with more detail on the requirements of language. So I'm not going into that right now. This is the very first task that we're doing. So I just want to see how well you do. Now, with that done, composition, section B. So you are given 4 topics to write on, 2 of them descriptive and 2 of them are narrative. You have to choose one, just one. So it's either one of the 2 descriptives or one of the 2 narratives. 350 to 450 words is the recommended word limit. So you want to meet the minimum at least, right? You don't want to be less than that. 450 is the recommended upper limit. You can go above that. You will not be penalized for going over the limit. What would happen if you do go over the limit? And similarly, right, for directed writing, the 250 to 350 words, so you want to meet the minimum and you want to stay within or at the maximum, but you can go over. So in both cases, right, what would happen if you've written less? Well, that just means you probably don't have enough content to satisfy the marking criteria, the rubrics. If you're going over, you've written more than, I mean, I don't want to use the word should have, but that you were more than you were recommended to. The problem with that for many students is that they go into detail that may be irrelevant, and they go into repetition, and they lose time, and with that they lose structure and organization of writing, and so the overall quality of writing really comes down. There are students, however, who do manage to write more, they go over the limit and they manage to maintain the quality of the writing. So yeah, and time, right? So students struggle with time management. And so if you're writing more, that means you're spending more time on this question, which means you're going to struggle with the other question. In this case, both of them are writing questions. So, right, I don't know if you want to put yourself in that situation. Of course, right, with decent practice, you should be able to manage writing in less than 1 hour, going through the whole thing in less than 1 hour. And so that leaves you with time. So it I wouldn't say, well, I would recommend not to, but if you do, if that's something that you normally, you overshoot the word limit, you write more, then just make sure that by the time your exams come up and the timetable has been published already, right? So when is your 1123 exam, Parker? Have you checked it out?
Yes, I have,
What are
but
the
I forgot
dates?
the date.
Forgotten the dates. Okay, just let me take a look. Right, so that's paper one's on the 6th of May, Wednesday, 6th May, and paper two is coming up first in April, 27th April. So probably the very first paper that you have. It's an AM paper. I think the exams are starting, so this do start from last week of April, somewhere around. And so this just might be the very first paper that you have. Is it? Right? When is testing starting? It's starting from the 23rd. Okay, so not the very first paper, perhaps, but close enough. Yeah. 27th April, English language. So there you have, right? So you got paper two first on the 27th of April, and then paper one next on the 6th of May. Okay, coming back. Now, so we do have how much time? We have December, January, February, March, April. That's 5 months, 5.5 months, let's say. Plenty of time. Okay, now, first, let's talk about what's called the writing process. And this is not something, it's not one of my creations, it's not something I've come up with. You search this exact phrase, this topic on Google, and the results you will get will be exactly as to what I will be explaining, right? No matter which website you look at. So when you want to write something, anything that you want to submit, that you want to be of good quality, right? As good as you can possibly manage. The first thing you want to do is collect points. You can collect points or ideas, whatever you want to call it, right? And the process you can, I call it brainstorming, right? That is one of the terms used. No, they're not storming, right? Some people call it mind mapping, so that's there. Flow charting, whatever, right? Jotting down, making notes, like whatever you want to call it. That's not the point. The point is you want to collect your points and ideas, and this works for any writing task, right? So this is equally applicable for a directed writing task. Uh, Highlighting the points of a summary and going through those and checking whether they are main points, they valid content points, or they are details and you want to leave them out. It's pretty much the same thing, right? You're going through the same process. So you want to note down your ideas. What do you want to write? So you can, again, put them down as bullet points. They don't have to be grammatically correct, complete sentences. You can put a flow chart. You can perhaps scribble, doodle in the side, like whatever. Collect ideas. Okay, however you want to do it. I normally used to use bullet points, or the way you see me right nowadays. I go with the arrows and stuff, right? So how whatever works for you. Now within that, right, within the collecting points, you want your main ideas depending on what it is you're writing, right? So if it's a narrative descriptive, we'll talk about that as well. Then you want details, right? What details will you include? You want to think about the organization of your writing. And I'm being very general over here, right? So you can become specific depending on the task you're talking about. You want to talk about the organization and flow. And you definitely want to think about the vocabulary that you're going to use. And within vocabulary, you've got two of them. You've got general vocabulary, so the kind of words that you would use no matter what it is you're writing about, right? And topic specific or topic related vocabulary. So if there's a specific, like we were talking about traveling abroad, and so if you can think or look up words that you would normally use in a scenario where you are talking about traveling, right? So, or for example, you're writing about sports, and so you're using certain sports vocabulary, right? Or you're talking about working out, and so you're using that kind of vocabulary. So, topic specific, you want to think about that, right? And so, if it comes to descriptive writing, for example, and so you want to think about adjectives and adverbs and other descriptive vocabulary that you would want to use, right? You will want to think about the vocabulary that you want to use to describe what you were experiencing with your senses. Okay, so vocabulary is, and so you want to think about all of that. You want to put that into structure, right? You want to think about how you're going to, which point comes first, which comes later, etc., etc. So that is the first step. The next step is writing a rough draft, and students don't do this. Even if they do, they really don't go for the second one, right? They think it's a waste of time. Write a rough draft. What's a rough draft? Whatever task you have, write out the task properly, right? You write it out properly in full, as it should be written, right? With the format, with the heading, with the paragraphing, etc. etc. Okay, you do all of that. But this is not what you're going to submit. Once you've written it out, you go about editing. So you go through it again, you read it. And this is the tough part. Why? Because you're looking for mistakes and you want to make improvements. And it is admittedly difficult. It is a challenge to find your own mistakes. But you have to learn to do that. That's a skill you have to develop. So you want to sit down, you want to read what you've written, and you want to edit it. And that would include adding details or vocabulary or ideas or taking them out, right? So subtracting them, taking them out of the equation. You want to move things about, right? Maybe work on the organization. You want to change the flow of things. Okay, so all of that, and you're also looking for mistakes. So any mistake to do with spelling, grammar, right? You haven't used the correct tense, your sentence structure is off, right? Punctuation. I'll add sentence structure over here for emphasis. So you want to look out for these things. And if you find any mistakes, you want to correct them. So you strike it out, you rewrite it, right? So the rough draft is going to get messy. You're going to put in arrows, asterisks, points, like if it really needs that level of clarity. Once you're done with all of this, right now, normally if you look it up online, it could be a 5-step process or a 6-step process, depending on how much they break it down into sub steps. Once you're done with all the editing, right? You figured out what you want to change, what you want to move about the organization, the vocabulary, right? The corrections that you need to make, you figured those out. Then you rewrite it, and that is what will be your final draft. Right? So it is rewritten with, right, all the corrections and improvements. And this is the one you will submit. Now, common question asked by students, sir, can we manage to do all of this in a test or an exam? No. Follow up question. Then why bother? Well, you're not always giving a test, you're not always giving an exam. That only happens like, maybe 3, 4 times a year, right? And so all the other times you want to go through this process, especially the rough draft, because you have time to. And what this will help you do is it will help you make improvements to your writing overall, the quality of your writing, right? The skill of finding mistakes, improving. And so how that will help? That will help because when you are in a test situation, you want to do this. You still write, so give yourself 5 minutes at least in a test or an exam, maybe 7 minutes depending on how much you have in total. So you need to, you know, work. You need to be good at time management, and you want to jot down the points on the back of your question paper or in the margin or somewhere, right? You want to jot down the points because uh, it's very easy, or at least easy, or it's possible, right? If I just dumb it down, like someone's really good at writing, it is possible to tell the difference between a piece of writing that was written without ideas being thought of and with ideas being thought of pre-writing. It is possible to tell them apart. Why? Because it's not it doesn't have as good flow, because why, the student is thinking while writing, and that pause, that stutter, that they have that mental stutter they have in coming up with ideas, and they stop and think, oh, what should I write next? You can pick that up, and you, okay, fine, so they were thinking on the spot, right? So you still want to do this, going with the rough draft on regular basis. When you sit in a test or an exam, this will help you. Why? You won't have time to do this, but you will have had enough practice to write a decent piece, right, without going through a rough draft. And while you are writing it out, you will be able to pick out your mistakes, or you'll be able to think, maybe I moved this over here. It's possible if you haven't written too much, you can move things about. And so you'll be doing it on the go. You'll be looking for your mistakes. You'll stop. Okay. And if, for example, you've written the spelling wrong, right? So, for example, you've written beautiful like this, and obviously that's wrong, right? And so you want to strike, right? So don't do that in a test or an exam, anyway, right? Just strike it up. Simple. So, right, this is the writing process that you should go through. You have your what you call it, directed writing task, right? I haven't put that up in Google Classroom yet, so I will. And you're going to get a composition as well. So both of these, go through this process, please. It will help you. And we still have time, right? We still have 5 months to the exam for those of you who will be appearing for it in this summer session. Okay. Now coming to narrative and descriptive. Let's first go over the requirements of each, and then we'll take a look at the right types of prompts. I might I was thinking maybe today's class would be short, but seeing how time is progressing, I might actually take a few minutes over time, if that's okay with you guys. Okay, so let's start with narrative writing because that's the one students tend to go for more often than not. Yeah, I did that again. Maybe move away from the button a bit. I don't know if that would help. So, writing a narrative, right? Telling a story. Yes, narrating a story. But, students think, oh, well, we can just write any sequence of events without thinking about it too much and it will work. Well, not for a good piece, right? You might think that telling a story is easier than describing something, but that's not true if you're not doing it properly. So, what's the structure of a narrative like? Well, the classical structure of a narrative looks like this, right? You have the beginning, right? And over here, you will be introducing, right, the setting. So, the where and when, right? You'll be introducing characters, and because you're short on words, 350 to 450 is not a lot. You don't want to fill in your story with lots of characters. You want to have one, two, maybe three characters at most, so you can stay focused, right? So you're introducing a setting, what's happening. It's a bright early morning. It's a windy evening. It's the night of a lunar eclipse, right? And the characters and what's happening at the beginning with these characters and the setting. And then you talk about a problem. So something happens, right? The problem means something happens. It's not like, oh, they got a flat tire. Something happens. Something happens to move the story forward. I've written that here. Okay, so this is the first point, and then, right, you move to the next one, which is called the rising action. Now, even though it's called action, doesn't mean that your story needs to be full of action. It could be dramatic, it could be suspense, it could be horror, it could be comedy, right? Action just means events, right? So once the character faces the problem, how do they react? What happens next, right? How does the story move forward? You want to think about that, right? Progression of your story, and then after rising action, you have the climax. So the climax is not the ending of the story; it is the peak of the story, right? Where the major events happen. Right, relating to, obviously, you started off with something happening with a problem, what happens next, the major events. Okay, so maybe there's a big fight, maybe there's a big misunderstanding, right? Maybe you turn into a werewolf and your parents send you to the zoo for free, something, right? So the major events. Then It's not over. From there, you're coming down, and that's called the falling action. Let me change colors. So after the main event, right, after the major events, how is the story sort of, you know, coming to a conclusion? So how is the story flowing after the major event? So maybe you could talk about the aftermath of the major event or the consequences or any other words you would like to use for that. And then finally, you reach the conclusion or resolution. Okay, and this is right where are the characters at the end. And by where, I don't mean just the physical location, right? What's happened to them with regard to all of this, right? Was something achieved? Was it a happy ending? It doesn't have to be a happy ending, right? The hero doesn't always have to win. So, how did things end up? And so, you want to think about these steps. You want to think about the flow of the story. For example, right? I mentioned you turning into a werewolf. So, you want to give it a comedic touch, right? It is the night of a full moon, and right, you're out, or you're on the roof of your house. It's a clear night, and you are admiring the eclipse, right? The lunar eclipse. It's a blood moon, super moon eclipse, something, right? Make it sound very fancy, and right, you're having popcorn or having coffee. It's winter, and then you suddenly start feeling itchy. So something happens. There's a problem. You start feeling itchy, right? You think it's mosquitoes, but there actually aren't any mosquitoes about. And then you see that your hair is growing longer, right? And you suddenly grew facial hair as well, and right, you're sort of getting bigger for some reason. Your voice is getting heavier. So here's where the rising action, right? You maybe run to your room, right? You check the mirror and you see that you have transformed into a werewolf, and you're panicking. So this is the rising action, and you're panicking, right? What to do? And right, you are slowly losing human conscious control over your body. Right, you're feeling hungry. You want to eat some meat, and you're looking around in the fridge to eat something, and your parents are at home. So the doorbell rings. Right, so maybe this is the climax. The doorbell rings, and right, obviously you aren't able to answer the door, so you're standing there in the lounge because you don't know what to do, and right, your parents walk in and they see you standing next to a picture of yourself, but they aren't able to recognize you. They immediately jump into action, and right, they grab you, they hit you over the head with like a cricket bat or something, or your mother you know slaps you away with her slippers, very typical Desi style, right, or something like that. And then they call animal control, right? So perhaps falling action, they call animal control and they send you away to the zoo, and right. So they put you in a cage and they feed you meat and stuff and like that. But you're feeling upset, and so are your parents because they can't find their son and you've been locked away. So, this is turning out to be tragic and not humorous. I thought it would be. Okay, so let's do tragedy then. And so you become like, the star attraction at the zoo, and even your parents and your younger siblings come to visit and take a look at you over the weekend sometimes, and you really react, and they get scared whenever you come by, and they're like, oh, that's a wild animal, right? And so you're all depressed. So you can have a depressing, sad story, right? Not always happy ending. And so you see how you move towards the conclusion. So you need to think of the flow of your narrative, the structure of your narrative. Any questions? I've been monologuing for quite a bit.
No. Like, are you gonna tell the structure of a descriptive writing as well?
Yes, although it doesn't have the same kind of structure, but yes.
Okay.
Amarza, Parker, do you have any questions about, any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, a narrative is written in the past, so you will write it in past tense. There's no debating that. I mean, there are instances if you are really good at it, you can write in the present tense, but that's only if you know what you're doing. So I would not recommend it for everyone. So written in past tense, always, right? You can write it as either third person or first person. That depends on you, right? And perhaps you can practice one approach with the other. What's good about the third person, it takes a distanced approach to the story. And so, right, you can cover more aspects because you are not personally involved, right? You can talk about one character when the other's not there. Again, you don't really have a lot of word words to really explore that. A first person approach is closer and more personal. Why? Because your character is the I, and so for the reader, the I is them, and right, so it becomes more engaging. Of course, it limits your perspective, right? So you whatever story you're telling should be about, it should follow your character in first person. Okay, you can't stop talking about your character with the I and talk about someone else. Acha. You can use certain techniques which are mentioned in the, I believe, the specimen paper mark scheme or one of the other papers, right? So you can use techniques such as cliffhangers, right? So ending without a complete story. That doesn't mean you ran out of ideas and so you stop midway, right? This is purposeful, right? So you end with the reader thinking, oh, what's going to happen next? You can use, for example, what's called a red herring. Now, obviously, for this one, you need to have your own reading experience and you need to know how to make this work, right? You are giving the impression of one thing, right? And you reveal that no, it's the other thing. What does that mean? So, for example, in suspense or thrillers or mysteries, right? If you've seen movies or read stories, what they do is they kind of show it or tell it in a way that you suspect one character of being the bad guy, of being the criminal or whatever, and it turns out that, well, oh no, he's not actually the bad guy. It was someone else who did not seem like they were involved in this at all, but they were the actual bad guys. And so what they did in the story is that they took your attention towards something that wasn't actually, you know, what you should have been focusing on. You should have been focusing on something else. But they take your attention away from it, and then they come like, oh, surprise! So this is, and you're like, oh wow, like what mystery? So red herrings are employed over there. There are many other that you can look up, right? And of course, to incorporate any of these, you need to practice them. You can't just go, oh, in an exam, oh, I'm thinking I'll do this today, and you just pop that in. Obviously, it requires certain skill. Okay. Uh, right. So, do you guys have any questions about narratives?
No.
Marza, Bakar? Okay, so we're good on narratives then, right? If
No.
I if I recall anything else in the future, obviously I'll share that with you. But I believe I've covered all the basics at least. Now, descriptives. So the focus over here is obviously on details. What kind of details? You want to talk about sensory details. Sensory details meaning to do with your five senses. What can you see, hear, feel in the physical sense? So we're talking about touch, right? Smell and taste. Depending on the topic, you probably might not be able to fit in all five of these, but at least two, right? Seeing and hearing always works, so you always have those. It's about the other three, right? Whether you can fit them in, and there are techniques for doing that, right? If you're not able to fit it in directly, there are other ways of doing it. And you're depending on the question, right? You also want to give emotional details, right? So your thoughts and feelings, and this is the feeling we're talking about. Oh, feeling happy, feeling content, feeling grateful, feeling upset, feeling something, right? Feeling reminiscent, for example, or feeling nostalgic, those kind of feelings. And your thoughts, what's going through your head, right? So you're going to talk about these two. Now when you have a topic, remember that this is not a narrative, and so the story or your writing should not be like the the flow of a story. What do I mean by that? For example, if you're writing, and this is like one question that's popped up a couple of times, you're writing about a a busy market, and so what you don't want to do is you talk about, oh, I was in the busy market, and I saw that there was a sale, and I went and looked at the purses, and I bought something, and then I went to eat something. And no, this is a narrative, it's telling you what you did. No, you don't want, this is not descriptive, you don't want to do that, right? I had biryani, and then I went and had some, I don't know, faluda, and then I continued shopping, and I bought an umbrella for some reason. No, this is not descriptive, this is narrative, and so you're ruining, right? So again, you want to take, you want to try and take a stationary approach, right? What does that mean? You're standing, decide like a location where you're standing, and this is the mark, right? So you're kind of like the nucleus over here. Okay, and from this point, what can you see? What can you hear? What are your experiences in terms of sensory detail and emotional detail, right? And again, right, the kind of detail you want to include depends on the question, right? So what are they trying to include? Let's say, oh, include detail about the atmosphere, include detail about the people, include detail about the location. Then focus on that, right? You can sort of, move about. So for example, you move from the signal, right? You cross the signal, for example, you cross the road and you move to the, I don't know, the chicken corn soup stand vendor, right? So it's getting chillier, and so you can see these guys across the city, right? So there's some guy selling chicken corn soup. You go and stand over there. Now you're not going to say, "I bought the soup; it was very tasty." Like no, again, it's not a narrative. So you're just slightly changing your, point of perspective. Again, if you can manage without this, do that. Okay. So you don't want to be moving about. And right now, as I mentioned, you can see and you can hear. There's a lot of that. For example, smell and taste, right? So if you're standing across the street, and you see that there's this vendor who's selling chicken corn soup. Now you're not there, you're not eating it, so you can't talk about the taste. How can I sneakily fit in taste into my writing when I'm not eating anything? Right? So for example, you can talk about the reactions of the people at the stall who are eating it. Right? You can, for example, say that they were licking the bowl, right? Or eating with a smile, which meant it was really delicious, right? Or they were, taking deep breaths, right? It had a good aroma. So you can include that detail from the perspective of the people you're with. Or what you can do, if you want to include this detail, for example, something that I've done earlier to explain to students, right? You're standing at the corner of the street and you're either eating or drinking something. So you have a cup of tea or coffee or juice or something, right? You're eating a sandwich or something and you're standing at the corner, and so you can include, right, the smell or the taste or the feeling of that particular thing that you are eating into your narrative, right? Just to right, have the smell and taste senses in your narrative as well. Again, it is not something that you have to do, right? I'll share a link with you about scripture. I think it's pretty good, right? Very basic but well explained, and so you can take a look at that as well if descriptive is what you want to go for. Again, as I mentioned, right, vocabulary. So you want to look up adjectives, adverbs, obviously nouns, right? Because what will you be describing with your adjectives? Obviously, you'll be doing nouns, right? So you want to look up good vocabulary that matches the scene that you're describing as well as the sense that you will be describing. So, right? Okay. Any questions with regard to descriptives?
No.
No.
Now, as far as organization is concerned, I hear budgies. Okay. Or perhaps they were lovebirds. Anyway, paragraph. Now, students generally have the notion that there should be three paragraphs and three paragraphs only: introduction, body, and conclusion. Now, as far as organization is concerned, that's true. You want an introduction, you want a body, and you want a conclusion. But should they be limited to three paragraphs in total? So, one short introductory paragraph, a huge body paragraph, and then a short conclusion? No. How many paragraphs can you have? Technically, as many as you want, or in principle, in reality, right? So, as many as you want. The thing is, what you need to be careful. So you want to have an introductory paragraph where you introduce your setting, whether it's descriptive or narrative or whatever it is, just like we talked about in the dietary writing task. You want the major details. So as far as the narrative is concerned, right, your beginning will be the introduction, then all of this will be your body paragraphs, and then your conclusion will obviously be the conclusion, right? But you can split them further, so the conclusion doesn't have to be one, it can be split into two paragraphs, right? You can take it slow. The thing about it is that you need to split your paragraphs properly, so you don't want to split them just from anywhere, right? A paragraph should focus on giving a complete set of information or detail. And so to help you with that, there's right tip and top just to help you. So the TI is time, the T is place, the TO is topic, and the last P is person. You can move the P's around, right? And so whenever the time that you're talking about, or the place, or the topic, or the person you're talking about changes, you want to start a new paragraph. So for example, for time, you're like, oh, time is not, changing. What can I do? Well, you can. You can say later, right? So later on in the day or later on in the story. So is time changing? Yes, time is changing, right? And so you start with a new paragraph, right? At his house. Oh, the place has changed. Hmm? The book, for example, there's a book in the story. The book was, the topics changed, right? If you're writing in first person, third person, right? And you change, you go like, oh, Bilal fought. Now, it doesn't mean that in every time you mention someone, right, a person's changing and so you try to keep it. That's not what I mean, right? But these are points at which you can possibly start a new paragraph. And again, whether you do that or not depends on how you're organizing it, how you want your story to flow, how much info, right? And so breaking it up into paragraphs makes it improves the readability, and it helps you manage your writing, and it raises the quality overall, right? It puts it to chunks. Now, right, I believe I've given you quite decent amount of guidelines with all of this. How much time do we have left? Less than 10 minutes for the class, unfortunately. So let's just take a look at the topics that we have. I'll guide you with the prompts. So descriptive. There are two ways they can give it to you, right? Either they can give it to you as a comparison between 2 points in time or two events. So the first one you can see, question 2, because question 1 was the dietary writing task. So write a description of a crowded place before and after a sudden burst of heavy rain. Now, because you're giving a comparative view, it actually makes the description very easy, because there's so much you can talk about, right? You'll be out of words before you know. So this is a description, right, with a comparison between two events or two time points. Over here, they're not talking about what you want to perhaps focus on in your description. The second one does that. Describe the feelings you experienced leading up to a challenging event. and the feelings you experienced afterwards. So this one's more not so much about the sensory details, but more about your feelings, right? So and they tell you the challenging event could be a sporting event, an academic event, or any other activity. So that's open ended, right? A crowded place could be a tourist attraction, could be a market, could be anything. So right. So whatever you think would be easier for you to describe. So this particular descriptor is more, the second one is focused towards feelings, right? There are other types of prompts which talk about physical location, as I mentioned, talking about atmosphere and people and surroundings and all of that. Then the narrative, right? So there are two types of prompts you will come across. The first one, write a story in which something unexpected happens at an important school event. So, right, you obviously don't jump into it directly in right normal cases. So you will start with a little backstory, what this school event was, why it was important, what led up to it, what was your role, what was the role of the character, obviously, in that school event, and then what unexpected thing happened, maybe why it happened, what were the consequences, what happened later. So again, right, that flow of the narrative, that structure of the narrative, you want to incorporate. And finally, write a story that this is something students confuse for some reason. Write a story that includes the sentence, when I saw the photograph, the memories came rushing back. This thing that they've given you in the quotes, that is the topic. So just like question number 4, question number 5 is, you write about some photograph that has some, history associated with it, that involves the main characters, a character or characters, and then you talk about the memories and what they were and why they came rushing back, and then you can actually take it forward, perhaps what happened after, right? You were reminiscing, so your focus will be on the memories, but you need to develop it. Your story will revolve around the photograph and the memories, right? But the question says include this sentence. So you will include it, you will not include it with the quotation marks, you will include it as a regular sentence in your writing. If it's part of a longer sentence, the W will not be capitalized. If it's a new sentence, it will be capitalized. But examiner, if you pick this topic, the examiner will be looking for this line in your story, right? Because that is the instruction given. Write a story that includes this. Any questions about the prompts?
No.
No.
All right, Bakar.
No, sir.
Okay, so I'll put this exercise up on Google Classroom as well. It's up to you which one you choose, right? Just mention the topic in your response so that I know what the topic is, so I can mark it and check it accordingly when we get to that. So you have two writing tasks for next time: the directed writing and the composition. Make sure you do them well, right? You follow the guidelines that I've tried to convey to you, and we'll see how that turns out. So yeah, that's all for today, and we've actually managed to finish within time. So that's nice. And right. So I'll see you all next time, inshallah.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah.